in my brief eavesdropping, it seemed like the conversations were very rich and very animated. So thank you so much for the energy and time you put into it. I think that's very much a reflection of the passion that all of us feel for where we live and the great fortune, the great good fortune we have to live here and be an active part of it. And of course, much of the reason that we are blessed to live in this extraordinary place is the federal lands which surround us. And in a similar blessing, we have 4 extraordinary individuals who are in charge of the federal lands which we get to share with our fellow community members and the world at large. And it was pointed out to me in past years by one of the panelists currently up here that there might have been a little bit of gender inequity by not having women go first. And so because we're flexible, as a middle-aged white guy, I'm exceptionally flexible. I thought I would try to rectify that. And so what we'll have now is our 4 federal land managers, Tricia O'Connor, David Vela, Pat Kenny, and Brian Glassbell, each talk for about 10, 15 minutes about the state of their jurisdictions. And then we will have a question and answer session open up to the room. We'll break for lunch after that. So that's what you can expect for the next hour or so.
And I also want to thank Jonathan for once again bringing the federal community back together and the global community at large. You know, it's a wonderful thing when people of like minds and interests come together and just to have a conversation. So thank you for doing that and for sponsoring this opportunity. Like Tricia, I'll just give you just kind of a little thumbnail of from an operational perspective of Grand Teton National Park. As you know, it's 310,000 acres. It also includes the John D. Rockefeller Jr. Memorial Parkway and the Snake River as well. We have about 150 permanent employees, about 250 seasonal employees, and a whole bunch of volunteers, and I'll talk about them a little bit later. Budget around $13 million, millions of dollars in project funding that we get through the service, but also through philanthropy. A poster child of that example would be Jenny Lake, of how philanthropic partners through the Grand Teton National Park Foundation came together to fund that project. It was a centennial project, and I'm pleased to report that next season will be the last construction season. And I will tell you, my friends, when you have a chance to go out there and you see those overlooks and you see just the impact on the infrastructure and the trails in the backcountry, what a gift to the nation. I think you'll be very proud of it. I'm so proud of our team, our philanthropic partners, and all who are involved, many of you in this room, that when you think about John D. and Rockefeller, you think about, just ordinary citizens in this community that for generations have given of their time and talents to make Grand Teton what it is. I always talk about the Maud Noble story. If you've ever been to Maud Noble's cabin, it's in Moose, and here this was a person that just had just simple dreams and aspirations, one person. And what she did is she brought people of like minds together in her log cabin, and she talked about the value and importance of a place like Grand Teton National Park. All it took was one person, one inspiration, one goal, one ambition to make this place what it is. Many of you in this room can look at those peaks over there because of what you have done over the course of your lifetime. Whether it was volunteering your time or participating in a planning endeavor or cutting a check. Your legacy on that landscape is there too. So another opportunity that I have, Jonathan, and venues like this is to thank you. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for your passion for your federal public lands, and in particular, Grand Teton, because I can assure you, my friends, the nation is the ultimate benefactors of what you do. And we're going to encourage that you continue to do that. So what's happened at Grand Teton over the year? Many of you experienced the eclipse firsthand. And I can think of no better example of collaboration and partnership and community than the eclipse. Many people in this room for 2 years joined us, Tricia, Brian, and others, to sit down and talk about, especially the county and the city, the town council, and employees, to talk about what is it going to mean to embrace the world in a total solar eclipse and to do it safely. My chief ranger was just asked to go to Washington to talk about how successful that venture was, the eclipse. The lesson that I learned personally from it is there is nothing that we cannot do when we focus our time and attention on a common cause. In this case, it was the eclipse. And the cause was to embrace the world, make sure that they had a safe and enjoyable time while they were here, and they went home safely. And my friends, they did that and more. I wish you could see the hundreds of letters that I've received from kids and from adults that said this was a life-changing experience. We've desktoped everything conceivable that could have happened. From a fire, remember we had a fire that time the year before. What happened if we had an earthquake? Remember we were still involved in a manhunt for an individual that was alleged to have killed 4 people. We were involved in other activities. And fortunately, the worst case scenarios didn't happen. Not one single search and rescue, not one single fire, not one single incident. That's a credit and a testament to collaboration and partnership by this community, for this community, and with this community. And I can give you many other examples of the value and importance of community. Moving on. One of the other things, too, that I am so grateful for, that is the impact that volunteers are having at Grand Teton National Park. For this reason, let me throw some numbers on you real quick. Can't go through a program with feds without talking numbers. So here are a couple numbers. It just came in. I think it made the paper today or yesterday. Grand Teton National Park 2017 visitation set a record for the 4th consecutive year. The park received over 4.9 million total visits. That's a 3% increase from the previous record in 2016. August, which included the total solar eclipse, had 65,000 more visits than the previous record of August of 2015. I have no doubt that this record visitation over 4 years will continue to happen. We had over 1 million visits, or 27% more during the past 5 years. And this trend is being experienced around the national park system. We are all about the federal community, about the visitor experience, in addition to protecting the resources for which you have entrusted us to protect. And I will tell you, my friends, that we're spending a lot of time and attention to do that. How do we go about doing that? There are a couple of things that we're focusing on specifically at Grand Teton. One is we need more boots on the ground. If you've been to Stream Lake over the years, and I've received some letters that, Dave, it wasn't the same experience I had 10 years ago, 5 years ago. What are you going to do about it? What we realized is that we needed to have a better sense for what was the visitor dynamic at Stream Lake. The other thing we were having problems was human-bear interactions. We had to put a couple bears down because of that. We implemented the Stream Lake Brigade, and there may be some members of the Stream Lake Brigade here. My friends, what we found out just blew our mind. As a result of having more boots on the ground, we had 0 bear incidences. We didn't have to put a single bear down because we were educating and telling folks, look, don't leave food unattended. Please don't feed the wildlife because unfortunately at the end of the day, the wildlife will lose. Don't put us in that position. And it completely changed the dynamic. The other thing is that we learned a lot about traffic flow. We learned a lot about, how do we need to park people? And so it's going to put us in an even better place. So when you think about these trends, they're going to continue. We have a duty and an obligation to make sure that the resources for which the world comes to Grand Teton are protected in perpetuity, but that we effectively manage the visitor experience as well. Volunteers will continue to help us to do that. The other thing is the value and importance of social science. Invaluable. My colleague from Yellowstone, I think some of you may have heard me say this last year, has been known to say that, Dan Wink, that the least studied species in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem is the human species. And Dan's right. So both of us, Pat and Dan and my staff and I, we're focusing a lot of time and attention on the visitor experience. What do they want when they come here? How long are they going to spend? Are they spending too much time here? Is the resource being degraded because of that visitor experience? So there are a number of factors that we're taking a look at to deal with the visitor experience. I will tell you, too, one other thing is that I've made very clear, and for those of you that know me over the past 4 years, you know I'm going after the kids. I'm going after the next generation of conservation stewards and advocates, and I don't care where they come from. We have a program called Mountains to Main Street where we bring diverse young adults from inner cities to Grand Teton. We train them, we give them skills. They go back to their communities. And in their own language and their own culture, they take kids in their neighborhoods to federal public lands. Not only national parks, but federal public lands. We began a program a couple years ago with Montana Youth Corps to bring kids from the Wind Indian Reservation to Grand Teton, to have them work on projects. And I will tell you, my friends, it's one of the most emotional experiences for me because I have the opportunity to welcome these kids, these young adults, to their ancestral lands. I have the opportunity, my staff, to remind them that they're walking in the footsteps of their ancestors 10,000 years ago. That the work efforts that they leave on the landscape is comparable to what was left by their ancestors. It's an opportunity for us to engage communities that don't know us, communities of color, youth, so that we build relevancy and they make that connection to their ancestral lands. Many other programs I can tell you about, but time is short. The only thing else I will share with you is that we share a lot of the interests that the community has. You better believe we're involved in conversations about the lack of affordable housing in this community. You better believe we're going to be talking about transportation, our footprint. Is it positioned to meet these increasing needs of visitation to our community and to our federal public lands, specifically Grand Teton? And we're also going to talk about how do we sustain and protect and serve the resources for which you have entrusted us to protect. My friends, thank you for all that you do to work with us hand in hand to achieve all of these interests. Thank you.
First, thank you so much for your excellent, much appreciated service. I'm wondering if you would be willing to give us an honest assessment about how the current administration's policy on climate change is translating into what happens with the allocation of resources, the focus of research, and the link between science and decision making at your jurisdictions. And if you are willing, please do. And maybe we can tell the journalists of the room to turn off their machines.
No, thank you for that question. It gets to something that Pat talked about earlier, and that's this transparency. The American public has a right and duty to need to know those types of questions. Fundamentally, for the Park Service, speaking for Grand Teton, it's business as usual. There's no question that there's a warming climate. I mean, we get that. We see it because of a proliferation of exotic plant species that maybe weren't on the landscape even 10 years ago. We also see it by our receding glaciers and our ice fields. And it's interesting because there's a really active field of science called ice field archaeology because of what we're finding in the ice fields. So I think that we continue to have a duty and a responsibility. And when you think of the Park Service Organic Act for the benefit of current and future generations, that future piece is something that we're spending a lot of time on. And the issue that you talked about is exactly one of those things. So you may not hear it called that. Words have meaning. I get that. But the reality is that it is business as usual. We still have a climate change function in the Park Service. We get, Pat and I, we get, updates all the time about what's happening across the system. So thank you for that question. But I think the reality is that it is business as usual. We have an obligation to do that. Worst case scenario is, what if we're wrong? It's too late 15 years from now. What do I tell my 6 grandkids? That I had the opportunity to affect in the world that I was responsible for, and I didn't take the challenge. I can't look at them in the face with pride to say, I didn't do that. I can say, we're doing it.
First of all, thank you for appearing here today. My question directed at the Park Service representatives. What is your current thinking on implementing a visitor reservation system?
No, Franz, thank you for that question. I agree with Pat. I think that the larger national parks have to look at, through the science, making science-based decisions is incredibly important as to what are the menu of opportunities and options. As you know, at Grand Teton, we don't have a congestion problem in the park. We only have it at designated areas, Jenny being the classic example. So, what we want to look at as part of those menu of options based on the science that we're getting from the visitor experiences, how best do we move people through Grand Teton? Where are they spending the majority of their time in? Where do they want to go? When we were working on the Moose Wilson EIS as an example, we gave them GPS units, visitors in the corridor. It was fascinating, Franz, how much time they spent, where they spent it, and why. That type of science will help us into the future as to, is that a menu option? I will tell you that, we talked about transportation earlier. Folks have proposed, Dave, what about a transit option? That's on the table. Absolutely. I can't tell you when, but the social science will continue to guide our decision making. And Franz, down the road, that may be part of the plan.
This actually probably follows up a little bit with what Franz asked, and I was going to ask David specifically, but all of you have 1 or 2 or 3 very popular destinations at Jenny Lake, July and August. Do we pave more sagebrush over so there's sufficient parking, or am I now going to share that hike into String Lake with 200 more people, whether it's Granite Hot Springs or whether it's Old Faithful or any of the popular spots? What's your particular view on it?
That's a very good question. And for us, the bottom line is safety. The safety are people if they have to park on the inside road. There's a safety factor there, and that really concerns me. There's also resource degradation, potential. But again, I think that's part of what the value of having boots on the ground. I mentioned volunteers as a classic example. So we get a sense for traffic flow. We get a sense for also increased law enforcement presence as well, the times of the day. So what we want to do is think smarter and use social media to help us. I will tell you, the Eclipse is the classic example of the value of social media. We were monitoring social media inputs real time coming into our website. So we were able to determine where were they at, what were they doing, and if we needed to make a management course correction, boom, we could do it real time. So technology and social media will also put us in a better place as to what that visitor experience is. Parking is a significant issue. It's one of those drivers as to the visitor experience, and that's what we're telling you. Look, I spent 30 minutes trying to find a parking space, Mr. Superintendent. What are you going to do about it? Well, let's talk about it. Let's look at what the data is telling us, look at what the science is telling us, what the social media is telling us, so that we can make appropriate decisions. I will tell you just real quickly that building additional infrastructure is not something that this superintendent is interested in because it's at the expense of the resource. I will tell you that up front. Even the whole question of affordable housing, well, Dave, just build more housing. No. What we're going to do is take advantage of the existing footprint to deal with our deferred maintenance and not take away from the resource to build more human footprint. I'm not interested in doing that. So I think there are a number of ways to deal with parking effectively, the affordable housing issues effectively, and transportation, including looking at the prospects of a transit system.
As a numbers junkie, where will your 2017 numbers be more specific to David and Pat? Will it be in one central location? I don't know, through the program here, or do we need to go to your websites?
No, you can. There should be on our websites. We sent a press release. In fact, I have it right here. The headline is "Visitation Sets Records for Fourth Consecutive Year," and we released it on January 16th. So I think it was in the paper as well. You can go to our websites, but if you're interested in further into the mechanics of how we get the numbers or anything like that, just give me a call, and I'd be happy to share some further background if you're interested.
Hi. First off, thank you for sharing all your information and being accessible to us. My question is around future pending government shutdowns, what they might look like for you, and if they're potentially any different than previous shutdowns under the previous administration.
Just 5 seconds just to recognize a couple of key partners for Grand Teton. I see April from Grand Teton Association. I don't know if anybody here's from Grand Teton National Park Foundation and Teton Science Schools that are very instrumental in helping us to do what we need to do at Grand Teton. But I think we got guidance last night. In fact, in a couple hours, I'm going to be briefed by my deputy as to what our plan is. Normally what happens in parks is you go to an incident command system. And normally it's the chief ranger that's the incident commander. For Grand Teton, we want to make sure that, we have, in case the weather changes, we have some snowplow operators, clearly law enforcement rangers. Everything is pretty much closed, but you have the winter activities. So I think the approach for the Park Service is very much a liberal approach, if you will. What you would normally keep open, don't close it. So the overlooks will remain open and that type of thing. It's going to be kind of business as usual, but there won't be the operational administrative component. Superintendent will not be working, unfortunately, but a very select identified assets will be working in the event of a shutdown.
I'm going to throw in one word on that. Right before the last shutdown, whenever that, or potential shutdown, I was talking to Dan Wank, and he was late getting on the call because he was in a planning meeting because they were planning, I don't know how many, the point is I don't know how many man hours you people are putting into silliness of the highest order. Your budgets are, that was an extraordinary number, about 50% more people and no more money. And Tricia, I can't imagine your budget's in any better shape. What a profound waste of human energy, and what tremendous disregard for you people as public officials. And I'm so sorry to hear that. I would like to ask each of you to just one last word. What is one thing that you would like to leave folks with? What is the one big thing? And for you other future speakers, that's a little foreshadowing, as they say in English scholarship, of what I'll be asking of you as well. But if you just leave us with one thing.
We cannot effectively, adequately protect the resources for which we are entrusted without you. So for those of you that are taking notes, I ask you to write 2 words. Thank you.